The capital had been abuzz with the news of there being 3 victors, which had never happened before. They had expected at least Katniss and Peeta to go through, even though the game master was planning on backtracking on that in the end with some sort of excuse. But that's how the man in question found himself sitting across one President Snow. 3 victors, Snow stated in a carefree tone dripping maliciousness as he drank a cup of tea. The game master was doing his best to stop from shaking. I had thought to add a little more flair and drama to the game. For the audience, Snow huffed, the games had been around for 74 years. They never needed more drama to make them like your little reality shows, because look at the mess you've created. The game master held the couch arms in a white-knuckled grip as he did his best not to meet President Snow's eyes. I don't know how someone of your standing thought they had such authority to simply change the games, Snow said as he bit into a muffin with their eyes finally locking. Please, sir. We can fix this. I can fix this. We can just kill them off screen and say it was an incident. But Snow was shaking his head with a small smile spreading across his face. Unfortunately for you. You succeeded in one part of your plan. The capital loves your little trio a lot and we have never gotten rid of those that won. The game master was confused, but then he heard a chef next to him as he came and set down a bunch of berries on a plate in front of him. Quite poetic, wouldn't you say? Snow said with a small smile as he saw the paling face of the game master. You didn't expect this disobedience to go unpunished, did you? The game master could only open and close his mouth as he stared at the berries, then Snow and back to the berries. Now eat your fill. Enough for your 3 victors. He wanted to argue with the president that he could do better, but he heard the cocking of guns behind him. Are you rejecting my kindness, game master? After all, they could use more monsters for the next games. I'm offering you this to thank you for your years of service. President Snow, your daughter is on the line. Snow smiled widely as he got up, checking over his clothes before to the door without as much as a glance back. The game master waited a minute as he heard the guards take a step closer. He knew the experiments they did for the games on people, but he also knew the berries' effects, and so slowly he started eating them, first one by one and then towards the end whole mouthfuls, as he knew what would happen to him now. Katniss had been waiting outside the hospital room when the doctors finally came out. You can go in. She scrambled through the door before regaining her composure, but she could already hear the giggle from Rue that told her she had been caught. Their eyes met. Hi KatnissxRue said from her bed as she sat up looking at the girl on fire. Katniss could see the color that had returned to her and her eyes not looking as hopeless as before. She had been here the whole time for Rue's recovery. Not that they had a lot of time, it had only been a few days since the last games and they had allowed Rue and Peeta to recover, but she already knew they were expected to start touring whether injured or not, because they wanted to strike while the iron was hot. She hated it. How are you doing, Rue? Katniss said as she sat down next to the bed. The girl just shrugged her shoulders with a smile on her face still alive. So that's a win, she said, drawing a choked laugh from Katniss. I'm glad. Thought we almost lost you when you started seizing on the plane back here. Luckily they had to save you. Some rule about not letting a victor die. They looked terrified, Katniss said with a forced laugh, trying to ease herself as she remembered how scared she had been, thinking Rue would die on their way to salvation. She felt Rue's hand rest on top of her own. That was something Katniss had been dreading to speak about with the girl. She remembered their kiss. Well, more than a kiss during the games, but that had been a stressful situation, even though she knew that maybe it had led to Rue getting more supplies that helped her last longer, but it wouldn't work. She was too young and Katniss had never really thought of girls like that. Rue, she said, and it must have been her tone because the girl suddenly tightened her grip on Katniss's hand. What happened in the games? I don't think. You're too young. Before she could finish her sentence, she suddenly felt lips pressed to hers. It took a moment for Katniss's brain to catch up to what was happening, but she didn't pull away, instead closing her eyes to savor it till Rue pulled away. Katniss slowly opened her eyes to Rue smiling innocently at her. "That's not fair, Rue," Katniss said, trying to hide her smile. "Katniss. It started like that. But we both enjoyed it. At least I hope," she said, looking hopefully at Katniss. "I was thinking about it," Rue said, and Katniss was about to interrupt before the girl raised her hand with her disarming smile. If I'm allowed to go into a game to fight for my life, then I should be allowed to choose what I want. It's one of the only things I have the power to choose myself." But Katniss stuttered, and the smile on Rue's face only seemed to grow till she dropped the question, "Do you like girls?" Rue looked taken aback for a moment but rubbed her chin as she looked up thoughtfully, then back at Katniss. "I don't. But I like you." Katniss knew it was the same for her. Rue was different. She had been with Gale before she was asked to play her part in the games with Peeta, which had led to them butting heads. It's as if Rue could read what she was thinking as the girl just smiled at her. "I'm guessing it's the same for you," she said as she laid back down on the bed. "They said I have a few more hours in here, then we have to go for the interview." "How is Peeta?" Rue asked, remembering the tense moments the trio had toward the end of the games. "Oh, yeah. He's fine. They had him fixed up a day or two before they were running him around for interviews." Katniss had remembered then trying to push her to do it, but she had told them she would wait for Rue to get better. At first, she had fought with Haymitch and Effie on it but had decided to lean into something to try to give her reason to stay. Effie had settled on her pushing her relationship with Rue as something to justify why she stayed with the girl, and a few days later she had seen the articles and newsreels about her staying with apparently one of her lovers in the hospital. Not to mention, with her out of the picture, Peeta had taken the opportunity in strides, as he told them about a supposed baby that she had. She was seething when she saw him talk about it, but Effie had stopped her from rushing in and setting him straight. She couldn't think about how any of this would look to Gale right now. She just hoped he would see that he was playing a part and that she wouldn't do something like that. But the kiss with Rue, everyone had seen that. Including Gale. She felt like such an ass, firstly betraying Gale, then leading on Peeta, even though at some parts he was pushing some things on his own. And now Rue was in the mix. But she had decided to stay with Rue in the hospital as Peeta continued his tour, and the way they wrote the articles and reported on it would make you think they had been married for years. But it worked. The game advisors weren't pushing as much for her to rush to her interviews, but still lurked like hyenas. "We'll talk later," Katniss said with a soft squeeze of Rue's hand, and not a moment later nurses came through the door. "See you later, Katniss." It was a few hours later that Katniss found herself ushered into a transport ship by Effie. She was about to argue with the girl till her eyes met Rue's standing on the opposite side with two attendants by her side. Katniss could guess it was her Effie and Haymitch. One of them gave the girl who was just nervously looking at her a push towards Katniss. Rue stood in front of her, head held low but their eyes still meeting. "Are you okay?" Katniss asked nervously, knowing the girls' treatment had been rushed so they could interview them. "I'm okay," she said, sneaking a smile up at the girl on fire. Suddenly the rear door opened and in walked Peeta with Haymitch behind him. Their eyes met and she could feel rather than see the snarl on her face, but at the warning glare from Haymitch it quickly faded. She understood that they had to sell their fake relationship for the games, but he had taken the lion run with it. Even the way he dressed was different and how he carried himself. Haymitch moved to stand beside Effie, the two making brief eye contact before looking anywhere else. "Katniss, love, ready yourself, as you will be present before the Capitol, although I wish we had time to dress you in something more eye-catching." That surprised Katniss, considering the amount of time the woman had spent on her clothes and, Effie moved in front of Katniss, making sure to drag Rue and Peeta on either side of the girl on fire and giving a small nod to Rue's attendants. Rue still didn't know how to feel about Peeta, whether angry or grateful to him. On one hand, he had open talked about killing her and she doubted he wouldn't have done it if it wasn't for Katniss, but he had also helped them win in the end. So reluctantly she decided not to think about it for now. The platform they didn't know they were standing on started to rise with all of them except Peeta looking around nervously, but Katniss was met with Haymitch and Effie's nods and smiles. The platform raised and as the sun started to come into view, Rue, feeling her nerves on ends, grabbed Katniss's hand. Their eyes met. Katniss didn't know if she should keep this going or let her down, but she was also confused because Rue had made some sense in what she said even though she wanted to deny it. "Let's just keep this up till we are good," Peeta said, interrupting Katniss and Rue's staring contest. "Peeta, we already won the game. We don't need to do this anymore, let's just let it die down slowly and disappear." But he shook his head. "Katniss, we are victors now. If we are able to be on the Capitol's good side, our lives for us and our families are set." She understood what he meant, but, "Am I really so bad?" he asked, throwing her out of her haze. "No, you're not," she rushed to say, even though she wasn't so sure herself. To her, Peeta was already seemingly being pulled into the glitz and glamour of the Capitol. Something she had seen before the games started. She reluctantly nodded her head. "Okay, we can," she said before she felt him grab her hand as he attempted to compose himself. She felt Rue's grip tighten a bit more. She turned to the girl who gave her that worry-free smile as if she wasn't panicking herself as they came into the Capitol's view. "And so we present our first ever trio of victors." They were greeted by massive cheers and chants, some for Peeta and Katniss, some for Rue and Katniss. Rue must have not been expecting it as she stood starstruck that they were people actually on her side. Peeta immediately played into his role, raising his hand as he smiled and waved at the crowd, making sure they could see him holding onto Katniss's hand. The rest of their day was spent speaking in interviews and touring the Capitol, even sometimes at galas where they seemed present but only as dressing in the back. Through it all, however, Katniss could feel Rue's eyes on her during the whole thing. Even when they were talking at galas and Peeta went to mingle, Rue would keep at the corner of the room holding onto Katniss's hand. She didn't make much effort to break their hold. Every time their eyes met, it seemed like Rue had something she wanted to say, but the words always seemed caught in her throat. But her grip on Katniss never waned. Now, with the games won, she could think of what came next. A pleasure she had not indulged in, as the reality that she couldn't make it had been on her mind since watching some of the old games. So what was her future?